What if I told you that the very title that defined Prince Harry's post-royal identity, the Duke of Sussex, might be hanging by a thread? Imagine waking up tomorrow and discovering that this title, once bestowed as a symbol of honor and independence, has been reassigned to someone entirely unexpected. Not William, not Anne, not even another male royal, but Sophie. Yes, Sophie, the Countess of Wessex, the so-called quiet royal, is suddenly the name whispered behind closed palace doors. And the spark that ignited this extraordinary rumor? A tense, emotional, and secretive reunion at Clarence House between King Charles and his estranged son, Prince Harry. Let's stop here for a moment. Ask yourself, how could such an unthinkable possibility even exist? A title given by the late Queen herself, a title wrapped in history and symbolism, being stripped away and reassigned? It sounds like the plot of a Shakespearean play. But isn't that, in many ways, exactly what the modern royal family has become? A living theater where drama unfolds under the scrutiny of the world? Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. Harry once stood before the world as a proud husband, a new father, and the embodiment of Diana's rebellious spirit. Today, he is estranged, criticized, and viewed by many as the weakest link in the chain of Windsor tradition. And now, insiders say, King Charles is weighing an option that would forever alter his son's legacy. But why Sophie? Why now? And why at Clarence House of all places? To answer that, we have to rewind the clock. Clarence House has always been more than just a royal residence. It's a fortress of conversations, confrontations, and quiet plotting. It was there that Charles conducted some of his most difficult negotiations during his marriage to Diana. It was there that Camilla was eased into public life, shielded by walls that had absorbed decades of scandal. And now, Clarence House has become the stage for another potential turning point, the future of the Sussex title. Picture the atmosphere. Harry, weary from months of criticism in the press, arrives in London under the radar. Security is discreet, the press kept at bay, yet whispers escape anyway. The reunion is billed as private, but the word private means little in a world where every royal move is dissected and sold. Inside, Charles is said to be cautious, even guarded. After all, how many times has Harry spoken in confidence, only to later reveal intimate details in interviews, documentaries, and memoirs? Still, the father meets the son. They exchange formal pleasantries. But behind their words sits a tension that has built for years, a tension born of betrayal, love, duty, and disappointment. Charles reportedly speaks first. His health is fragile. His reign has been marked by turbulence. And at this stage of his life, every decision carries enormous weight. Harry, on the other hand, is described as restless, eager to mend, but unwilling to surrender his independence. Can you feel that tension? A father clinging to duty and legacy. A son clinging to relevance and dignity. Now here's where it gets even more fascinating. According to palace insiders, Harry didn't come empty-handed. He came armed with proposals, ideas for how he might reintegrate into royal duties, even partially. Imagine the irony. The man who once declared he was stepping back, now stepping forward, hat in hand, asking for relevance within the same institution he abandoned. But Charles is no fool. He knows that to welcome Harry back unconditionally would risk undermining the monarchy's credibility. Too much water has flowed under that bridge. Too many words, too many interviews, too many wounds. So Charles offers something else. Something startling. Instead of full reintegration, he floats the idea of transition. Transition of duties. Transition of titles. A reshuffling of responsibilities within the monarchy's fragile architecture. And it is here, right here, where Sophie's name first enters the conversation. Sophie, the quiet worker. The woman who rarely courts controversy, who has shouldered countless engagements without complaint, who has become, without anyone noticing, a cornerstone of the firm. Charles reportedly points out her loyalty, her discretion, her willingness to serve without drama. Unlike Harry and Meghan, who broadcast their grievances to the world, Sophie has played the long game of silence and duty. In Charles's eyes, this makes her not only trustworthy, but indispensable. Now, pause for a second. Can you imagine Harry's reaction? To sit across from his father, already feeling sidelined, and here's Sophie's name raised as a possible alternative, the symbolism alone would be devastating. Harry, born a prince, replaced by someone who married into the family, someone with no blood claim to Sussex at all. It's not just a slap in the face, it's a rewriting of royal hierarchy. And let's not forget Meghan. Though she wasn't present at Clarence House, her presence was felt like a shadow in the room. For Meghan, titles are currency. They represent status, influence, and, let's be blunt, brand value. To lose the Sussex title, to have it reassigned to someone else, would be the ultimate humiliation. You can almost picture her pacing in Montecito, scrolling through reports, calculating her next move. Would she go on the offensive? Would she play the victim card once more? Or would she, in fury, cut the cord entirely? This is why this story matters now. Because the Sussex brand is crumbling. Deals once golden are turning sour. Public opinion is waning. And at the same time, Charles is under pressure to secure the monarchy's future. He cannot allow scandal and disobedience to weaken an institution already fighting for relevance in a modern world. Sophie, by contrast, represents everything Harry does not: stability, loyalty, silence, and duty. In this game of royal chess, she is the queen Charles can rely on. But make no mistake, this is not merely about one title. It's about legacy. It's about history. It's about who gets written into the record as protector of the crown, and who gets erased as the rebel prince who threw it all away. The Clarence House reunion was not just a father-son conversation. It was a crossroads. One path leads to reconciliation. The other leads to replacement. And so, as the walls of Clarence House held their secrets, the world outside speculated. Was Charles truly preparing to strip Harry of the Sussex title? Would Parliament be involved? Would Sophie accept such a mantle, or would she hesitate to step into shoes drenched in scandal? The answers, for now, remain hidden behind closed doors. But here's the chilling truth. Titles in the royal family are never secure. They are gifts, yes, but they are also weapons. And in the wrong hands, or in the wrong era, they can be taken back, reshaped, reassigned. The Duke of Sussex may yet remain Harry's. But for how long? And at what cost? Because what came next, after that Clarence House meeting, would ignite a storm that no one, neither Harry, nor Charles, nor even Sophie herself, was prepared for. It began with a silence so thick it could cut the air in two. Clarence House, draped in its usual quiet grandeur, became the unlikely stage for a meeting that many believed would never happen again. Father and son, king and prince, betrayer and betrayed. The reunion between King Charles and Prince Harry was not just another royal footnote. It was the spark that set the monarchy ablaze with whispers of betrayal, redemption, and replacement. Think about it. How do you welcome a son who has dragged the family name through mud on global television? How do you sit across from someone who penned a memoir, bearing your most private wounds, yet still call him your child? And how does that son, bruised by rejection, step into a room knowing he may never again be fully embraced? The Clarence House reunion was more than just tea and polite conversation. It was theater, a performance for history. And like any great play, the audience never sees all the lines, only the fragments leaked, whispered, and carefully crafted by palace insiders. But those fragments, those fragments, hint at a conversation so explosive, so charged with emotion, that it may well alter the trajectory of the British monarchy forever. Harry arrived first, they say, not in a motorcade, not with flashing bulbs, but quietly. He wanted discretion, but there is no such thing as discretion when you are Prince Harry. His arrival was noted by staff, whispered to aides, and within minutes, the press outside began speculating. Had Charles finally agreed to meet? Was reconciliation on the horizon? Or was this just another empty gesture? A father placating a son one final time before shutting the door for good? Inside, the mood was tense. Harry, described by one insider, looked nervous but determined. His hands fidgeted. His eyes darted. For a man who once stood proudly in military uniform before global audiences, this was not the face of confidence. This was the face of desperation. And Charles? He was stoic, his voice measured, his posture regal. But beneath that calm exterior lay exhaustion. His reign had already been plagued with scandal, illness rumors, and endless comparisons to his mother. The last thing he needed was another storm from his youngest son. Still, the meeting went ahead. And what unfolded, according to whispers, was part confrontation, part negotiation. Harry began by attempting to bridge the gap. He spoke of Diana, of duty, of family ties too sacred to sever. He invoked the memory of his mother, hoping to pierce through his father's walls. But Charles, ever the strategist, steered the conversation toward legacy. Not emotions, not memories. Legacy. It was here that the conversation took a darker turn. Legacy, in Charles's eyes, was not something Harry could protect anymore. Too many bridges had been burned. Too many secrets aired. Too many reputations damaged. Charles spoke of responsibility, of the monarchy's survival, of the need for strength in the face of public skepticism. And Harry? He countered with relevance. He argued for his place, his right to remain a player in the royal game. He wanted a role, perhaps not as grand as before, but a role nonetheless. Now pause and ask yourself, was this Harry's olive branch, or was it his last desperate grasp at significance? Because here lies the irony. The boy who fled the palace for freedom now begged for a place at the table. The man who scorned titles now clung to the last one that defined him. The Duke of Sussex. Charles listened, patient, unmoving. Then, almost casually, he shifted the ground beneath Harry's feet. If Sussex could not serve the monarchy in Harry's hands, perhaps it could in someone else's. And that's when the name surfaced. Sophie, the Countess of Wessex. The suggestion landed like a thunderclap. Sophie, the loyal workhorse of the family, the one who had never courted the spotlight, suddenly positioned as a candidate to inherit the Sussex mantle. Imagine Harry's reaction in that moment. To be sitting across from his father, pleading for his place, only to hear his title, his identity, potentially reassigned. Not to William, not to Anne, but to Sophie. Why Sophie? That's the question everyone is asking. And the answer is painfully simple. She has never betrayed. She has never faltered. She has never, not once, embarrassed the crown. In Charles's eyes, Sophie represents the monarchy's ideal. Loyalty without complaint, service without scandal, presence without chaos. Everything Harry once promised to be, but failed to deliver. The conversation reportedly grew tense. Harry protested. He reminded his father that Sussex was his by right, given by the Queen herself. He warned that removing it would unleash chaos in the press, in America, even within the family. But Charles, hardened by years of ridicule, seemed unmoved. For him, this was not about fairness. It was about survival. And that survival meant making choices that would hurt. Choices that would cut deep. Choices that would leave scars. When the meeting ended, no public statement was released. No photographs. No smiling faces. Just silence. A silence heavier than words. But within that silence, insiders say, a line had been drawn. The Sussex title was no longer untouchable. It was a pawn. And pawns, as any chess player knows, can be sacrificed to protect the king. Here's the part that makes this all the more fascinating. Harry didn't leave Clarence House with answers. He left with uncertainty. He left with the realization that his position, once unshakable, now depended entirely on his father's will. And Sophie? She wasn't even in the room. Yet her shadow loomed over every word. But here's the real cliffhanger. What happened after that meeting didn't just involve Harry and Charles. It pulled in others. Whispered influences from William, subtle maneuvers from, and quiet counsel from Camilla. This was no longer just a father-son standoff. It was a royal chess game with more players than Harry realized. And the next move, when it came, would turn whispers into headlines and suspicion into fury. Because the Clarence House reunion was just the beginning. The storm that followed would shake the monarchy to its core. What do you cling to when the world that once defined you has turned its back? For Prince Harry, the answer has become painfully clear: relevance. That word, sharp, elusive, intoxicating, has haunted him since the day he stepped away from Buckingham Palace with Meghan by his side. Once the golden boy of the royal family, Harry has spent years trying to craft an identity outside the firm, only to find himself slipping further into obscurity. Netflix deals, podcasts, memoirs, each promised him permanence, but each seemed to fade as quickly as they arrived. And now, in the wake of the Clarence House reunion, Harry's desperate bid for relevance is the only card he has left to play. Imagine Harry standing in front of his father at Clarence House, his voice heavy with a mix of frustration and longing. He's no longer the soldier in uniform, no longer the cheeky young prince adored by millions. He's a man on the outside looking in, pleading for a way back, not as the heir, that was never his role, but as someone who still matters. Someone whose presence in the royal fold is more than a footnote. Can you feel the irony? The very institution he fled, accusing it of suffocating him, has now become the only source of legitimacy he cannot live without. To understand Harry's desperation, we need to examine the trajectory of his post-royal life. When he and Meghan announced their decision to step back in early 2020, it was presented as a bold, independent move. The Sussexes painted a picture of freedom, of breaking the shackles of duty to embrace a new kind of life in America. They spoke of privacy, autonomy, and a vision of service on their own terms. For a time, it worked. They secured multi-million-dollar deals with Netflix and Spotify, launched their Archwell Foundation, and basked in the glow of sympathetic interviews. But then reality set in. The deals that once seemed golden turned into question marks. Spotify terminated their partnership, with executives openly mocking the couple's output. Netflix reportedly grew impatient, with only Harry's Invictus documentary salvaging some credibility. The Archetypes podcast, once hyped as Meghan's grand platform, fizzled into silence. And Harry's memoir, Spare, though initially explosive, eventually became just another tabloid relic. Sales cooled. Public sympathy waned. The novelty wore off. It's a brutal truth, isn't it? In the world of celebrity, relevance is fleeting. You can be today's headline and tomorrow's afterthought. And for Harry, who once believed his name alone would guarantee lasting influence, the reality has been devastating. So when Harry entered Clarence House, it wasn't just to reconnect with his father. It was to beg for relevance, whether through roles, duties, or even a symbolic gesture of trust. He wanted the palace to validate him again, to acknowledge his place in the royal machine. He may have spoken of reconciliation, but beneath those words lay a deeper hunger, the hunger for a stage. Now, let's step into Charles's shoes. The king, weary from years of scandal and criticism, knows that Harry is a liability. He has seen his son weaponize private conversations before. He has endured the sting of Spare and the endless interviews in which Harry painted him as cold, distant, even cruel. For Charles, trust is nearly impossible. And yet, he cannot fully discard Harry either. Why? Because Harry still matters to the public. He is still Diana's son. He is still a prince. And in a world where perception is everything, Charles knows the cost of abandoning him completely could be high. This is where the contradiction lies. Harry is both a threat and an asset, too unreliable to trust, yet too symbolic to erase. And Harry knows this. He leans on it. He reminds his father of Diana's legacy, of his duty as a father, of the public's enduring curiosity about him. He frames himself as indispensable. And for a moment, Charles may even waver. But here's the twist. As Harry argues for his relevance, Charles introduces Sophie into the conversation. Why Sophie? Because her presence exposes Harry's weakness. She has managed to remain relevant without drama, without betrayal, without headlines. She has shown that relevance in the royal family isn't about fame, it's about loyalty. And compared to Sophie, Harry's claims fall flat. Think of the sting Harry must have felt. To hear his father float Sophie's name as a possible successor to the Sussex title while he himself sat in the room, asking for validation. It wasn't just a suggestion. It was a verdict. A verdict on his years of choices, his public battles, his decision to turn his back on duty. Charles, without saying it outright, was telling Harry, "You are replaceable." And that's what terrifies Harry most. Being forgotten. Being replaced. Being written out of the history books as a cautionary tale rather than a celebrated prince. That fear, more than anything, drives his actions now. Let's not forget Meghan in all this. Her fury, though unspoken in public, is palpable. For Meghan, relevance equals influence, and influence equals power. Losing Sussex would be a devastating blow not only to their brand, but to her personal identity. Remember, she has styled herself as Duchess of Sussex in every venture, every contract, every introduction. To strip that title and hand it to Sophie would leave Meghan exposed, vulnerable, humiliated. Can you imagine the arguments behind closed doors in Montecito as reports of this leaked out? Meghan pushing Harry to fight harder. Harry caught between protecting his wife's pride and reconciling with his father. The emotional strain must be unimaginable. But here's where this chapter takes an even darker turn. Some insiders whisper that Harry may be willing to compromise in ways he once swore he never would. He may be prepared to bend, to apologize, even to retract some of his earlier criticisms, if it means salvaging his place in the monarchy. And that raises a haunting question. How much is Harry willing to sacrifice to remain relevant? His independence? His convictions? His wife's trust? Because relevance, once lost, is almost impossible to regain. And Harry knows it. That's why his meeting with Charles wasn't just about reconciliation. It was about survival. His survival as a royal. His survival as a public figure. His survival as more than just Diana's troubled son. But here's the cliffhanger. While Harry desperately fought for his place, others were already moving behind the scenes. William, Anne, even Camilla, each with their own agenda, their own influence over Charles's decision. Harry believed he was pleading his case directly to the king. What he didn't realize was that the real battle was unfolding in rooms he wasn't invited to. And when those forces collided, Harry's bid for relevance would face its greatest test yet. Power. That's the word that defined King Charles the moment the crown touched his head. But power in the monarchy isn't about brute force or dramatic proclamations. It's about patience, calculation, and the ability to play the long game. And Charles, after decades in Diana's shadow, after years mocked as weak and uncharismatic, has finally proven that patience can be a weapon. The Clarence House reunion with Harry wasn't about reconciliation. It was about control, about strategy, about making a calculated move that would reshape the balance of power within the family, and perhaps even history itself. Think about Charles's journey for a moment. For most of his life, he was the man waiting for a throne that never seemed to arrive, waiting for public approval that always went elsewhere, waiting for the stain of scandal to fade. He was patient, not because he wanted to be, but because he had to be. And that patience trained him in a skill Harry never learned. The art of waiting until the perfect moment to strike. So when Harry walked into Clarence House that day, he thought he was initiating a conversation. In truth, Charles had already decided what needed to be said. This wasn't about hearing Harry's pleas. This was about setting the terms of survival for both his reign and his legacy. Here's what makes Charles's calculated move so fascinating. On the surface, he appeared calm, even fatherly. He listened, nodded, even allowed Harry the illusion of control. But beneath that calm exterior, every word, every silence, every glance was strategic. Charles knew Harry's weaknesses, his hunger for relevance, his impulsive nature, his desperate need for approval. He knew that Harry, despite all his talk of independence, still craved the validation only the monarchy could provide. And Charles used that to his advantage. Instead of outright rejecting Harry, which would have driven him further into rebellion, Charles dangled a possibility. Not of full restoration, but of transition. He painted a vision where the monarchy could adapt, evolve, reassign duties in ways that preserved its dignity. It was a clever move. By framing it as evolution rather than punishment, Charles masked the harsh reality. Harry was being sidelined, replaced. And then came the masterstroke. Sophie. The name itself was like a scalpel, carefully inserted to expose the wound Harry feared most: irrelevance. Sophie, who never courted the spotlight, suddenly thrust into the conversation as a potential successor to the Sussex mantle. Why Sophie? Because her very existence as a counterpoint to Harry highlighted his failures. She is loyal. He is rebellious. She is discreet. He is outspoken. She serves quietly. He monetizes loudly. For Charles, it wasn't just about considering Sophie for Sussex. It was about holding up a mirror to Harry's inadequacies. Can you see the calculation here? Charles didn't need to take the title away that day. He only needed to plant the seed, to make Harry realize that his grip on Sussex was not permanent, that his value was conditional, that his replacement was waiting in the wings. The threat alone was enough to destabilize Harry. And destabilization is a powerful tool. This is classic Charles. He has always operated not with dramatic gestures, but with subtle shifts. Think back to how he rehabilitated Camilla's image, slowly, carefully, until the once reviled mistress was accepted as queen. Or how he weathered years of mockery to become a monarch the public, if not adoring, at least tolerates. Charles plays the long game, and in the long game, Harry is simply another piece on the board. But here's where the move becomes even more layered. By introducing Sophie into the conversation, Charles wasn't just controlling Harry. He was sending a signal to the rest of the family. To William, that Charles was willing to protect the monarchy's future by sidelining threats. To Anne, that loyalty would be rewarded. To Camilla, that he could manage crises without her intervention. And perhaps most importantly, to the public, that the monarchy had options. It was not dependent on Harry. It could survive without him. Do you see the brilliance? Charles turned what should have been a vulnerability, Harry's rebellion, into a demonstration of strength. He showed that titles, even ones as symbolic as Sussex, were not untouchable. He reminded everyone that the crown, not the individual, held the real power. And yet, this calculation came with risk, because every calculated move has a cost. By floating Sophie's name, Charles risked enraging Meghan. He risked alienating Harry permanently. He risked unleashing a media firestorm. But Charles has never shied away from risk when it serves the long game. He knows that in the chessboard of monarchy, you sometimes sacrifice pieces to protect the king. And if Harry had to be sacrificed, so be it. Now let's add another layer. Some insiders whisper that Charles's suggestion of Sophie wasn't just about her loyalty, it was about gender optics. In an age where the monarchy struggles to appeal to younger, progressive audiences, elevating a woman like Sophie, a mother, a steady partner, a quiet worker, would send a powerful message. A message that the monarchy was modern, adaptable, forward-thinking. By contrast, Harry and Meghan represented drama, grievance, and chaos. Who would the public rather see in the Sussex role? The answer, Charles wagered, was obvious. Harry, of course, didn't see it this way. To him, it was humiliation, betrayal, another reminder that he would always be second, always expendable, always replaceable. His protests, his pleas, his reminders of Diana's legacy fell on ears that had already decided the path forward. And that's the essence of Charles's calculated move. He didn't need to strip Harry's title outright. He only needed to make him believe it could happen, to plant doubt, to force him to confront his fragility. That doubt, that fear, would haunt Harry long after he left Clarence's house. It would shape his decisions, his arguments with Meghan, his interviews, his public image. Charles had placed Harry in a cage without walls, a cage built from uncertainty. But here's the cliffhanger. While Charles's calculated move seemed masterful, it wasn't made in a vacuum. Others in the royal family saw opportunity in Harry's weakening position. William, Anne, even Camilla. Each had their own agenda, their own stakes in the game. And as Charles tightened his grip, these silent players began making moves of their own, moves that would complicate his strategy in ways he could not predict. Because in the royal chess game, even kings can be outmaneuvered. Why Sophie? That was the question on everyone's lips when whispers began swirling through the corridors of Clarence's house and beyond. Why not William, the heir? Why not Anne the stalwart? Why not even Edward, Sophie's own husband? Why Sophie, the so-called quiet royal, suddenly thrust into the eye of one of the most dramatic storms the monarchy has faced in decades? The answer lies not in loud gestures or headline-grabbing stunts, but in the very qualities Sophie has cultivated over decades in the shadows of bigger personalities. She is the antithesis of Harry. Where he is volatile, she is steady. Where he speaks out, she holds her tongue. Where he hungers for the spotlight, she has thrived in the margins, building respect not by demanding it, but by earning it. Day after day, event after event, handshake after handshake. Think back to Sophie's early days in the royal family. She was mocked, underestimated, dismissed as Edward's +1. The tabloids gave her no mercy. There was even scandal. Remember the so-called fake chic sting in 2001, when Sophie was caught making disparaging remarks in what she thought was a private business conversation. It could have destroyed her, but it didn't. She survived, learned, and adapted. While others in the family doubled down in arrogance, Sophie took a quieter path. She apologized, rebuilt her image, and committed herself fully to royal duty. Over time, the press forgot the scandal, and the public began to notice something else: her unwavering dedication. And dedication matters. More than charisma, more than speeches, more than theatrics. In a monarchy riddled with drama, dedication is the rarest currency of all. Sophie has become, in many ways, the monarchy's insurance policy. She shows up. She works. She does it without fanfare. And because of that, she has become indispensable to Charles's vision of a monarchy that survives scandal after scandal. Now contrast that with Harry. Once hailed as the people's prince, he has squandered years of goodwill. For every Invictus Games triumph, there's been a Netflix documentary dripping with accusations. For every heartfelt speech, a memoir chapter filled with venom. Where Sophie chose silence, Harry chose confession. Where Sophie built credibility, Harry traded his for cash and applause. So when Charles looked around for someone who embodied the monarchy's stability, who else could he turn to but Sophie? But let's dig deeper. Why Sophie specifically as a candidate for the Sussex mantle? Part of the answer lies in her marriage. Sophie's relationship with Edward has been steady, scandal-free, and resilient. Unlike Harry and Meghan, whose union seems constantly strained under the weight of public scrutiny, Sophie and Edward have weathered decades together without the drama. Their bond reflects the kind of stability Charles desperately wants the monarchy to project. And what better way to reinforce that image than by elevating Sophie into a role once tainted by Harry and Meghan's chaos? There's also the matter of trust. Sophie is said to be one of the few royals who enjoys an unshakable bond with both Charles and Camilla. During the Queen's final years, Sophie was one of her closest companions, often visiting quietly, offering comfort without making a spectacle. That intimacy matters. In the monarchy, trust is everything. And if Charles is to risk reassigning one of the crown's most symbolic titles, he would only consider someone he trusts completely. Sophie fits that bill. But perhaps the most fascinating reason is optics. Think about it. Sophie isn't flashy. She doesn't dominate the headlines. And yet, precisely because of her low profile, reassigning Sussex to her would sting Harry all the more. He isn't being replaced by a superstar or a rival brother. He's being replaced by the woman no one thought to notice. The quiet one. The overlooked one. The one who simply did her duty. Isn't that the ultimate rebuke? Can you imagine how that must feel for Harry? To have his legacy threatened not by William's shadow or by Anne's iron will, but by Sophie's quiet competence. It's humiliating. It's devastating. And it's calculated. Charles knows this. By floating Sophie's name, he struck at the heart of Harry's greatest insecurity. That he has been outpaced not by louder voices, but by steadier ones. And let's not forget Meghan. To her, Sophie represents everything she resents about the royal institution. The silent obedience. The submission to duty. The erasure of self. Meghan wanted to be celebrated, adored, given equal footing with Kate. Sophie, by contrast, never sought the spotlight, and yet here she is, potentially ascending into the very title Meghan once wore like armor. For Meghan, the humiliation would be unbearable. Can you picture her reaction? Watching Sophie, who never courted Hollywood glamour, suddenly poised to inherit the Sussex mantle? It would be nothing short of a nightmare. But here's the kicker. Sophie herself never asked for this. That's what makes her the perfect candidate. Unlike Harry, who lobbied for attention, or Meghan, who demanded recognition, Sophie's power lies in her reluctance. She doesn't chase titles. She doesn't need validation. Which makes her, paradoxically, the safest vessel for the Sussex name. By reassigning Sussex to Sophie, Charles could transform it from a symbol of rebellion into a badge of loyalty. Now pause and think about the irony. The Sussex title was meant to represent a new era of royal progressiveness when the Queen first granted it to Harry and Meghan in 2018. It was supposed to symbolize youth, diversity, and change. And yet, just a few years later, it may find itself on the shoulders of Sophie, a middle-aged countess, a symbol not of change, but of tradition and stability. Isn't that the perfect twist of fate? Still, the choice is not without risks. Would the public embrace Sophie as Duchess of Sussex, or see it as a blatant punishment of Harry? Would Parliament intervene, citing the permanence of royal titles? Would Harry wage war, legally or publicly, to prevent such a reassignment? The questions hang in the air, unanswered. But here's where the cliffhanger emerges. Because if Sophie truly is the royal insider's choice, then she cannot ascend quietly. Her elevation would spark not just tension with Harry, but with Meghan, with William, with the very foundations of the monarchy. And whispers suggest that Sophie herself has reservations. She knows the danger of being thrust into the spotlight, the risk of being pitted against Harry and Meghan on the world stage. Yet Charles, ever calculating, may not give her that choice. He has already set the stage. The Clarence House reunion was only Act 1. The naming of Sophie was Act 2. And what comes next, when decisions become declarations, could unleash a storm unlike anything the House of Windsor has seen before. Because Sophie's rise isn't just about her. It's about the monarchy's survival. And in that survival, Harry may find himself erased. Fury. That's the only word that fits the mood said to be simmering behind the carefully guarded gates of Montecito. Meghan Markle, once the shining star of royal modernity, now faces the humiliation of her life. Whispers that Sophie, the quiet, overlooked royal, could take her place as Duchess of Sussex. And though Meghan has remained silent in public, insiders insist that silence is nothing more than a mask. Beneath it lies anger, disbelief, and a cold determination to fight back. Let's be blunt. Meghan has always understood the value of titles. She might have claimed that she and Harry didn't care about titles when Archie and Lilibet were born, but every action since has suggested otherwise. The Duchess of Sussex isn't just a ceremonial honor. It's her brand, her weapon, her shield. It appears on book jackets, contracts, and event listings. It's the name that gives her access to red carpets and powerful circles. Strip her of it, reassign it to Sophie, and what is she left with? Meghan Markle, the actress who once had a role on Suits. Can you imagine how that feels? To go from Hollywood starlet, to royal duchess, to global icon, only to watch the very identity that made you relevant in elite circles handed to someone else? Someone who has no Instagram page, no Netflix series, no podcast. Someone who doesn't chase celebrity, but embodies everything Meghan rejected about the royal life. Sophie's quiet rise is not just a blow to Harry, it is Meghan's nightmare. According to palace aides, Meghan was blindsided when Sophie's name began to surface. At first, she dismissed it as gossip, a silly rumor floated by tabloids to sell papers. But then came whispers from more credible sources, briefings from palace insiders, commentary from seasoned royal reporters, subtle signals that the conversation was real. The reality hit her like a storm. Charles wasn't just considering sidelining Harry. He was threatening her very identity. And yet, Meghan stayed silent. Why? Because silence is strategy. Meghan has learned that speaking out too quickly only fuels the fire. Instead, she allows the rumors to swirl, calculating her timing. But behind that silence, insiders claim, her fury is volcanic. She sees Sophie as unworthy, unprepared, undeserving. After all, Meghan once believed she was the one to modernize the monarchy, to bridge the gap between tradition and progress. Sophie, in her eyes, is the opposite, a relic of old-world obedience. For Sophie to inherit Sussex is not just an insult. It's a betrayal of everything Meghan thought she stood for. And the betrayal cuts deeper because of the Queen. Meghan knows that the Sussex title wasn't Charles's to grant in the first place. It was given to Harry and Meghan by Queen Elizabeth herself on their wedding day. To have Charles even hint at reassigning it feels like an erasure of the Queen's blessing, a rewriting of history. Meghan, who has always positioned herself as a favorite of the late Queen in her narratives, sees this as a direct attack not just on her, but on her legacy. Here's where it gets even more complicated. Meghan understands that optics are everything. If she lashes out, she risks looking petty. If she stays silent forever, she risks irrelevance. So what does she do? Insiders whisper she's already drafting her countermove, a carefully curated narrative of victimhood, one that frames her as once again being pushed out by the institution she tried to modernize. The irony, of course, is that Meghan has built her entire brand on leaving the monarchy behind. But losing the Sussex title? That's a story she cannot spin away. Now think of the dynamic between Meghan and Harry in this moment. Harry, bruised by his father's calculated move, still hopes for reconciliation. Meghan, furious and humiliated, urges resistance. Imagine the late-night arguments in their Montecito mansion. Harry, torn between loyalty to his wife and his need for his father's approval. Meghan, pacing, reminding him of the betrayal, the humiliation, the insult. Their marriage, already strained by external pressures, suddenly tested by the possibility of losing the one thing that defines them both, Sussex. But Meghan's fury isn't just personal. It's strategic. Losing Sussex would weaken her financially as well as socially. Think about the deals, the branding, the introductions. Would Netflix still be as interested in Harry and Meghan if they were no longer the Duke and Duchess of Sussex? Would Archewell carry the same weight if it were run by Mr. and Mrs. Mountbatten-Windsor? Titles carry currency, and Meghan knows it. Here's another layer. Meghan has always believed she was in competition with Kate. Every outfit compared, every speech contrasted, every public appearance scrutinized. For years, she resented being cast as second fiddle to the future queen. But Sophie? Sophie wasn't even on Meghan's radar. To now be replaced by her, not Kate, not Camilla, not even Anne, but Sophie, stings in ways words cannot capture. It's not just being replaced. It's being replaced by someone she never considered a rival. And that, to Meghan, is the ultimate humiliation. Yet Meghan's silence in public raises another question. Could she be planning a masterstroke? Could she be preparing for the moment when, instead of reacting defensively, she unleashes a carefully timed bombshell, an interview, a memoir, a documentary, that reframes the narrative once more? That possibility alone is enough to keep Charles and his aides awake at night. They know Meghan's fury is not just emotional, it's tactical. And here's the chilling part. Meghan's silence gives the impression of calm, but silence is not peace. It is preparation. And if she has remained silent so far, it is only because she is waiting for the perfect moment to strike back. But the danger is this. Meghan's fury is not contained. It is contagious. It influences Harry. It fuels tension within the family. And as it grows, it threatens to turn whispers of Sophie inheriting Sussex into a full-blown war of words, headlines, and legal threats. Because what Meghan does next could decide everything. Will she play the victim once again, or will she fight like never before? And when she makes her move, will it save her, or finally destroy everything she and Harry built? One thing is certain. Meghan's fury will not stay silent forever. And when it erupts, the monarchy may never recover from the shockwaves. But just as Meghan's silence was hiding fury, the palace's silence was hiding something else. An entirely different kind of battle, one that wasn't about individuals, but about the survival of the royal brand itself. And that battle would soon take center stage. War. Not the kind fought with swords or soldiers, but the kind fought with images, headlines, and perception. In today's monarchy, branding is everything. The British royal family no longer rules through decrees, it rules through narratives. And when the Sussex title became the subject of whispers, it wasn't just a family squabble. It was a branding war, a high-stakes struggle over who controlled the story, who wore the crown of relevance, and who would be remembered by history. Let's be clear, Harry and Meghan understood branding from the start. When they stepped down in 2020, they didn't just leave. They trademarked. Sussex Royal was their flag, their business model, their future. They envisioned a global empire built on philanthropy, media, and lifestyle ventures. In their minds, Sussex was more than a title. It was a brand. But when the Queen intervened and blocked their use of royal, the empire crumbled before it began. What remained was Sussex, stripped of its grandeur, yet still potent enough to sell books, podcasts, and documentaries. But branding is fragile. And while Harry and Meghan weaponized their title for financial gain, the brand of Sussex became tainted. No longer associated with duty and loyalty, it became shorthand for scandal, lawsuits, and endless grievances. Public sympathy turned into fatigue. Headlines shifted from admiration to ridicule. The Sussex brand, once golden, began to collapse under the weight of its own contradictions. And this is where Sophie enters the picture, not as a rival personality, but as a rival brand. Imagine the contrast. On one side, Harry and Meghan, jetting between Montecito mansions and Hollywood premieres, broadcasting their pain to the world. On the other side, Sophie, understated and dependable, cutting ribbons, attending small-town events, offering comfort to grieving families. Where Harry and Meghan turned the Sussex name into a brand of drama, Sophie could restore it as a brand of dignity. For Charles, the branding war was simple. Who represents the monarchy better in the modern age, chaos or stability? Now think about the power of optics. Sophie's reassignment of Sussex wouldn't just punish Harry. It would rebrand Sussex itself. Overnight, it would go from being synonymous with rebellion to being synonymous with loyalty. The public would see it not as a fall, but as a reclamation. A title once tarnished, now polished again by the hands of someone who embodies quiet service. That's the genius of Charles's calculation. It's not just about stripping Harry. It's about saving the Sussex name. But branding wars aren't fought only inside the palace. They're fought in the public arena. Social media became a battlefield. Hashtags trended. Memes circulated. Loyalists to Harry and Meghan screamed of injustice, while monarchists cheered the idea of Sophie's rise. The debate wasn't just about titles. It was about values. Do you side with the couple who claim to speak truth to power, or with the monarchy that demands loyalty above all? The Sussex brand was no longer just a family asset. It had become a cultural fault line, and Meghan knew this. Her fury, as we've seen, wasn't just personal. It was strategic. She knew that if Sussex was reassigned, her brand value would plummet. Invitations would slow. Hollywood interest would cool. Endorsements would dry up. She and Harry might still be famous, but without the Duchess title, fame would feel hollow. That's why Meghan's silence, though tactical, masked a deeper panic. She understood that in the branding war, perception is survival. But here's the irony. While Harry and Meghan clung to their title as a shield, Sophie never needed branding. She wasn't selling herself on Instagram. She wasn't pitching documentaries. She wasn't writing memoirs. Her brand was authenticity, the one thing Harry and Meghan could never manufacture. And in a world oversaturated with celebrity noise, authenticity is priceless. Think of the royal family as a corporation for a moment. Who would you choose as the face of your brand? The couple embroiled in lawsuits and accusations, or the quiet countess whose reputation has only improved over time? The answer is obvious, and Charles knew it. But branding wars are dangerous because they escalate. For every move Charles makes to reframe Sussex, Harry and Meghan have the power to counterattack. They can go public, cry betrayal, unleash another wave of interviews. And make no mistake, they know the power of their voices in America. A single interview with Oprah, a single Netflix special, can undo months of careful palace maneuvering. Charles may control the titles, but Harry and Meghan control the microphones. So what happens when branding collides with legacy? That's the question at the heart of this war. Charles wants to preserve the monarchy's brand for future generations. Harry and Meghan want to preserve their brand for survival. And somewhere in the middle lies Sophie, thrust into a spotlight she never asked for. Her name now a weapon in a war between father and son. But here's the cliffhanger. Branding wars rarely stay contained. Already, whispers suggest that powerful figures outside the monarchy, politicians, celebrities, even foreign governments, are watching closely. Because in a world where image is power, the fate of Sussex is more than a family drama. It's a global branding battle with stakes higher than anyone imagined. And as the war intensifies, the question becomes, Will Sussex survive as a name of honor, or will it collapse entirely under the weight of betrayal and reinvention? History. It hangs over the monarchy like a ghost that never leaves. Every decision, every scandal, every whispered conversation is shadowed by centuries of precedent. To understand the danger Prince Harry now faces, we must look backward. Because titles are not just ceremonial ornaments, they are markers of power, tools of control, and sometimes, weapons of punishment. And the weight of history shows us that what may happen to Harry has happened before, with devastating consequences. Think of Edward VIII, the king who gave up his crown for love. He believed he could outwit tradition, live life on his own terms. But what did history do? It punished him. Stripped of his role, his dignity, his authority, he lived the rest of his life in exile, forever defined not as a sovereign, but as a man who turned his back on duty. His title changed. His reputation never recovered. Doesn't Harry's story echo that? A man who walked away from the monarchy for love, believing he could build a new path, only to find himself haunted by the institution he tried to escape. Or look at Henry VIII's children. Mary, Elizabeth, Edward, they each saw titles shift like sand depending on their father's whims. Elizabeth herself was declared illegitimate, stripped of her princess title, only to regain it later and ascend the throne. Even someone as iconic as Elizabeth I knew what it meant to be erased and rewritten. Harry should remember this. Titles in the monarchy are never permanent. They are conditional. They belong not to the individual, but to the crown. And then there's the example of Princess Diana. While beloved by the public, Diana learned firsthand how titles could be wielded as weapons. After her divorce, she lost Her Royal Highness. A single strip of letters, yet a devastating blow. No longer HRH, she was reduced to Diana, Princess of Wales. Imagine the symbolism. Removing her from the inner sanctum of royalty, making her a figure of glamour but not of power. Harry grew up watching his mother's title stripped away. That memory, seared into him, must haunt him now as whispers rise about Sussex. History also teaches us that stripping titles isn't just about punishment, it's about survival. During World War I, King George V stripped German relatives of their British titles, rebranding the family as Windsors. Why? To protect the monarchy's image, to distance itself from scandal and disloyalty. The lesson is clear. When the crown feels threatened, titles are expendable. Harry, in his rebellion, has made himself a threat. And Charles, like George before him, may see stripping Sussex as the only path to protect the institution. But history isn't just about punishment. It's about irony. Consider this. The Sussex title itself has a history of controversy. The last Duke of Sussex before Harry was Prince Augustus Frederick, son of King George III. He defied tradition, marrying twice without permission, rendering his marriages invalid under the Royal Marriages Act. He too lived as an outsider, at odds with the crown. Does that sound familiar? It's almost poetic. Harry, inheriting the title of Sussex, seems doomed to repeat the same fate as its original bearer: rebellion, rejection, and estrangement. And let's not forget Parliament. While Charles wields immense influence, the stripping of peerages and titles has historically involved legal measures. Remember the Titles Deprivation Act of 1917, used to strip enemy princes of their British titles during wartime. If Charles truly wanted to reassign Sussex, precedent exists. And though the act was used sparingly, it proves that even dukedoms, once thought untouchable, can be erased when the crown wills it. Here's where the weight of history grows heavier for Harry. Every example shows that the monarchy survives by sacrificing individuals. It doesn't matter if you are king, queen, prince, or duchess. If you threaten the institution, history will erase you. Edward VIII, Diana, George's German cousins, even Elizabeth before her ascension, all were, at some point, cut down by the crown's ruthless need to endure. And now Harry stands at that same precipice. But what makes his case unique is Sophie. History has plenty of stories of royals stripped of titles, but rarely do we see those titles reassigned to someone else within the family. That would not just be punishment, it would be replacement. Erasure followed by substitution. Imagine the blow to Harry's legacy, not only losing Sussex, but watching it thrive in Sophie's hands. History would record Harry as the man who squandered it, and Sophie as the woman who redeemed it. The weight of history doesn't just crush, it humiliates. Harry knows this. That's why the Clarence House reunion shook him so deeply. He isn't just fighting for a title. He's fighting against centuries of precedent that tell him he cannot win. Titles are not his to keep. They never were. They belong to the crown. And yet, the irony is thick. Harry has spent years claiming he doesn't care about titles, that he values freedom over formality. But history shows us the cruel truth. Those who say they don't care about titles are often the ones most defined by their loss. Edward VIII said he gave up his crown for love, but spent the rest of his life bitter in exile. Diana claimed she didn't need HRH, but fought fiercely for her sons to retain theirs. And Harry, who once insisted titles didn't matter, now clings to Sussex as if his very identity depends on it. But here's the cliffhanger. History is not just repeating itself, it's evolving. In the age of social media, the stripping of a title wouldn't just be a quiet legal maneuver. It would be a global spectacle, debated on Twitter, dissected on TikTok, screamed across tabloids. And the fallout could be unlike anything the monarchy has ever faced before. Because if history shows us anything, it's that titles can be stripped. But in this digital age, the consequences may be far greater and far bloodier for the crown itself. Public opinion. It's the invisible throne every royal sits on, whether they admit it or not. Crowns may glitter, titles may impress, but without the people's approval, the monarchy collapses into irrelevance. And in the case of the Sussex title, public perception has become the battlefield where loyalty, betrayal, and legacy are being judged in real time. The court of public opinion is ruthless, and its verdict could decide whether Harry keeps Sussex, whether Sophie inherits it, or whether the title itself is forever tainted. Let's start with the obvious. Harry and Meghan's relationship with the public has been a roller coaster. When they first married, the world celebrated them as the embodiment of a modern monarchy. Diverse, glamorous, and relatable. Crowds cheered. Headlines gushed. The Sussexes were the fresh air the Windsors needed. But slowly, cracks appeared. The Oprah interview. The Netflix docuseries. The Spotify fiasco. Spare. Each move pulled them further from admiration and deeper into suspicion. Sympathy gave way to fatigue. People who once rooted for them began asking, do Harry and Meghan ever stop complaining? Contrast that with Sophie. While Harry and Meghan dominated headlines with explosive revelations, Sophie quietly built trust with the public. She didn't make grand speeches. She didn't seek flashy contracts. She showed up at hospices, at schools, at military bases. Small gestures, small crowds, small moments that never made global news but built a foundation of respect. When the Queen died, it was Sophie who was spotted comforting ordinary mourners outside the palace gates, a moment that captured hearts precisely because it wasn't orchestrated. To the public, Sophie represents something Harry and Meghan have lost, dignity and silence. Now imagine how the public would react if the Sussex title were stripped from Harry and given to Sophie. It would split opinion like never before. Monarchists would cheer for them. It would be justice, a cleansing of the Sussex name after years of scandal. They would see Sophie as a worthy custodian, someone who could restore the honor of a title tarnished by rebellion. But others, particularly in America, would rage. They would see it as cruel, vindictive, another example of the monarchy punishing Harry for daring to break free. In this battle, perception is everything. And here's where it gets even more complicated. Social media amplifies every whisper. The hashtag Team Harry crowd posts emotional tributes, painting him as Diana's son, a victim of a cold institution. The hashtag Team Monarchy crowd counters with memes mocking Harry's pleas for relevance, framing Sophie as the quiet savior. The hashtag Duchess Sophie even begins to trend. In the digital age, titles aren't just legal, they're cultural symbols. And the cultural tug-of-war over Sussex has become ferocious. Let's not forget Meghan's role in this perception war. For her supporters, stripping Sussex would be the ultimate act of cruelty, proof that the monarchy never accepted her. They would frame it as racism, as institutional vengeance, as punishment for a woman of color who dared to marry into the firm. That narrative is powerful. It resonates in Hollywood, in activist circles, in corners of the press hungry for controversy. Meghan may stay silent, but her silence is filled with implication. And the public, primed by years of grievance, is ready to interpret it as confirmation of persecution. But the monarchy has its own weapon, history and symbolism. The palace could frame Sophie's reassignment not as punishment, but as continuity. They could present it as a rebalancing, a restoration of dignity. The narrative would be carefully crafted, Sophie, the loyal servant, honored with a title she would never exploit. In that framing, Harry wouldn't be the victim. He would be the architect of his own downfall. And for many in Britain, that story would stick. This is where the battle becomes truly fascinating. It's not about who deserves the title legally. It's about who deserves it emotionally. To the British public, tired of scandal, Sophie feels safe. To Harry's supporters abroad, Harry and Meghan still symbolize rebellion against a cold institution. Both narratives can coexist, but only one will dominate headlines. And whichever one wins will shape the monarchy's reputation for years. Now, let's ask the dangerous question. What if the public verdict turns against Charles himself? Imagine the backlash if the move is seen not as wise, but as cruel, not as strategic, but as petty. Charles has always walked a tightrope of approval. One misstep, and the monarchy could be accused of bullying, of weaponizing titles against its own. That perception could spark not just sympathy for Harry, but deeper questions about the monarchy's future. Public perception is fickle. One week, Harry is mocked for complaining about frostbite and spare. The next, he's pitted as the son cast aside by his father. One week, Sophie is praised for her humility. The next, she could be vilified as the usurper of a title never meant for her. Nothing is fixed. Everything is fluid. That's the danger of ruling in the age of headlines. And here lies the cliffhanger. The people's verdict has not yet been delivered. It hangs in suspense, swayed by every leak, every photograph, every carefully worded palace statement. Harry believes public sympathy will save him. Charles believes loyalty to the monarchy will prevail. Meghan believes outrage can be weaponized. And Sophie? She says nothing at all, perhaps the smartest move of all. But the silence won't last. Because sooner or later, the people will decide. Is Harry still the Duke of Sussex? Or has the public already crowned Sophie in their hearts? And just as the crowd murmured, another shadow stirred inside the palace. The unseen hand of William and Kate, whose influence over Charles's decisions was stronger than Harry ever realized.